Welcome to the Bywords Show. I'm your host, Hannah Hughes. Bywords is all about equipping women for purposeful living by starting conversations, celebrating stories, and inspiring faith. In a world that applauds the hustle, I'm here to help you break free from the lies and come back to what really matters. It's time to get real, get rooted in truth, and come alive in relationship with Jesus so you can show up to each day with intention and confidence no matter where you're at in your story. Here we believe that embracing our stories brings hope, healing, and purpose to the process, and sharing our stories helps others do the same. Whether you're looking for a midweek faith refresh, practical tools for pursuing your dreams, or just need some good old-fashioned girl talk, you're in the right place. Grab your latte and let's dive in. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Bywords Show. So glad you're here today. Today is the day, you guys. I do want to give a quick trigger warning as we get into this episode with my friend Brittany Tinsley. We are going to be talking about some mental health things and self-harm, but I just know this is a topic that, although it's heavy, like it's really important. Like we need to be talking about these things in the faith world, and like navigating this in faith is just such a complex thing that I'm so thankful, Brittany, that you have been willing to share like your own story. You're talking about these things. And so we're going to get into that today. But first of all, Brittany, just thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited to chat with you and hear more about your story. Before we do, I have to ask you a question that I ask all of our guests with a little icebreaker, like a little warm up, right? So what's been filling your cup lately? Literally, what do you like to drink, but also figuratively?
Well, literally today in my, giant Stanley, I have raspberry lemonade, which is maybe a strange drink at 10 o'clock in the morning, but it's what we've got going right now. I'm not a big coffee person in the morning, so it's lemonade today.
I love that.
But also figuratively, we have gotten to go on the greatest trip this summer. We went to Alaska for 3 weeks. I used to live there. We love it there. And we've been back now for a couple of weeks, but I'm still just kind of riding the high of that and being somewhere not Texas in the middle of the summer. It was wonderful.
Oh my gosh, I really feel for you. My family just moved to Colorado from Texas last year, and I always lived in Texas before that. And so in the summers, I'm like, oh man, it's hard.
Brutal.
Texas summer is wild. It's hot. It's humid. There's mosquitoes everywhere, and it's just so no wonder you're drinking raspberry lemonade at 10 a.m.
Yeah,
it's great.
Right. It is what it is. There are no rules here.
Exactly. Well, I love that. My family also loves traveling, and I've never been to Alaska, but it's on my bucket list. So we need to go there for sure. So cool that you lived there too.
Yeah. I lived there in middle school for a couple of years, and it's just my favorite. It was my favorite place we lived. My dad was in the military, so we moved around a lot. It was my favorite place we lived. It's my favorite place to vacation. When my husband and I got married, I was like, listen, I love Alaska, so I'm going to really need you to love Alaska too. He'd never been there. and I took him, and he did. And now that's just our family's favorite place to go.
Oh my gosh. I love that. Look at you. You got him converted. It's great. It all worked out.
It did.
Wait, I love that. Okay. Well, let's back it up a little bit because I want to hear more of your story, and then we can dive into this topic of, our scars, and even specifically self-harm and mental health and these things that you have wrestled with the Lord. And now this book has come out of that. So why don't you take us back to the beginning? Do you want to just share some of your story and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. So like I said, I grew up as a military kid. My dad was Army, and I'm the oldest of 6 siblings. And so we have a pretty big family. We moved around a lot. And really the stabilizing force in my life was my faith. My parents were both Christian. I was raised in the church. And so no matter where we moved, one of the first things we always did was get plugged into a church. And that really became the basis for my community in most of the places that we were stationed. Right before my freshman year of high school, we moved to San Diego, and I again got plugged in very quickly to a church there. Had a lot of great friends. I played volleyball. I was like the straight A honors student, the model oldest child. Like I was the kid that everybody looked at and was like, we hope our kids turn out to be like you, which that's not to toot my own horn or anything. That was just the message I got all of the time. I was really good at playing that role. And then at the end of my freshman year of high school, one of my good friends that I had made there died by suicide. And I didn't see it coming. He didn't, give any signs. We hadn't had any conversations about it. And I decided very quickly that it was my fault that he was dead, that I should have noticed something, that I should have caught on to something. And that guilt just started eating away at me. And I didn't tell anybody about it. I didn't tell my friends or my family or the pastors at my church or, anybody that I was wrestling in that way. And so I just
Yeah.
felt like it was something I had to deal with on my own. And as we know, when we deal with things on our own, that typically doesn't end very well. And that was the case for me. And so by that next fall, so fall of my sophomore year of high school, I had started self-injuring. I did it once, sort of impulsively, and very quickly was hooked. I thought I had discovered the magic secret. It made all of the craziness sort of disappear. It gave me a sense of control. And I thought, this is how people must be living. Like this is how people must function. And I just haven't been doing it right all of this time. And so I very quickly let that sort of spiral out of control. And it became the thing that I just did all of the time. It was the way that I sort of kept myself at this even keeled baseline. If I felt too guilty, I did it. If I felt too happy, I did it. If I felt anything at all, I just wanted to be totally numb. And that went on for a decent amount of time until I sort of thought, this is getting very out of control. This is taking over. This is starting to scare me a little bit. And so I did the thing that I thought I would never do. And I went and told on myself. And I told some people at my church that I was struggling. And initially, the first person I told responded very kindly, but we ended up telling my youth pastor. And that youth pastor, after consulting with some other pastors, came back and told me that I was no longer welcome in our youth group. Like I could be there on Sunday mornings and Wednesday nights when sort of everybody was allowed to be there. But any camps, any extra, outside of sort of those times kinds of things, I was not allowed to be at. I wasn't allowed to volunteer anywhere anymore. I'd been very involved. And that was just crushing. It was the community that I had depended on my whole life was sort of stripped away from me in one fell swoop in a moment when I really sort of needed community the most.
Yeah.
But my family was Army. And so we moved a couple of weeks later. And I thought, this is my fresh start. I get a chance to start over. I was going into my junior year of high school at that point. And I hadn't really quit self-injuring. I just thought I need to hide it better. I took a chance. I told somebody, I asked for some help. It didn't work out. Now I just need to hide it better. And so for the next couple of years, that's what I did. I sort of went through these seasons and cycles of more self-injury or less self-injury. And when it was the harder times, the deeper struggle, I just hid it more effectively. And it wasn't until I got through college and into adulthood that I really thought, like, I don't want to keep living this way. And I have done all of the things you are supposed to do. I still had a strong faith through that whole window of time. And I've been praying and I've been reading my Bible and I've had accountability and I've been in community, and none of these things are really working. And I don't understand why. And it wasn't until adulthood that I went back to therapy willingly for the first time and really dug in to what healing looks like. And I think it was at that point that things sort of shifted for me. And so now fast forward several years, I'm here, I've written this book, it's coming out in September, and it's sort of the fruition of a lot of years of struggle that I think God is finally making good, which is what he promises us he'll do, that he'll turn all things for good. And so I think that now I'm sort of living in the answer to that prayer.
Yeah. Oh, that's so beautiful. First of all, thank you for being willing to share your story, because I went through years of self-harm myself as well. And I relate so much to what you were saying about needing to just hide it better and trying to make sense of this and feeling like this isn't what good Christians do, but like
Right.
this feels like my best or only option, and like trying to reconcile all of that also with what you believe about God and what you've seen in church, like all these things. It's a lot to
It is a
process,
lot.
especially when you are struggling with mental health. So I'd love to just kind of start unraveling this a little bit and unpacking, because I'm sure there might be some people listening who are like, yeah, I get it. Like I've been there too. And I've struggled with the shame of that. And then there may be some people listening who are like, that makes no sense to me. Like, I don't understand people who do that. Why would you do that? And I think, as the church grows and we have more openness in this conversation about mental health through a faith lens, there is a little bit more compassion and understanding and meeting people where they're at, and coming at it from a place of less judgment and trying to understand more. But I guess just as a baseline, do you want to speak to like kind of what's the process? Like, why would someone ever choose to do that, to feel better or to make sense of their pain?
Yeah. I mean, I think that the reason people are drawn to it is probably a little bit different for everybody. But for me personally, it was that first time it was really impulsive. It wasn't something that I had been exposed to or that I'd really thought about before the moment that I did it. In that moment, I was just in a lot of pain. And for whatever reason, my brain was like, you know, what would help this make sense if there was a physical wound to match the pain that you're feeling. And, and so that first time, there wasn't a lot of thought involved. Now, after that, I thought, this is a way for me to control everything. And, you know, there's so many mental health things that I think sort of stem from this place of control, you know, whether it's eating disorders or addiction or whatever. It's a way to control your emotion. It's a way to control what's going on in the world around you. It's a way to control what is physically happening to your body. And so, you know, I think it's an extreme version of some of that, you know, for people who haven't necessarily struggled with that or who don't have that sort of impulse. But if you look at it through the lens of control, then I think it makes a little bit more sense, because it is something that you can control. Only I could control how I was being hurt. Only I could control where I was being hurt. And it gave me something concrete to sort of match everything else that was going on internally. I think a lot of people think it's for attention. And in my experience, that has never been the case. I don't know. I've talked to a lot of people who have struggled with this, because this is sort of the space that I live in at this point. But I have never heard a single person say, I was doing it for attention. I just wanted somebody to look at me. I think that's a really common misconception. And so I think for a lot of people, it has to do with, like I said, control, or even being brought back into the present. Sometimes the attempt to numb everything would swing too far towards numbness, and that in and of itself can be scary. And so then, in the same way that it once numbed, it's a way to sort of bring you back into your body. And again, it's not a great coping mechanism. There 8,000 other choices that are better options. But at the end of the day, it is a coping mechanism. People do it because it works. It does something for them. It releases endorphins. It makes them feel better. And so, you know, I think that when you look at it through a slightly different lens, it doesn't sound as crazy as maybe it does initially to somebody who hasn't ever experienced it.
Right. Yeah. It's hard to understand if you're like, why would you ever choose that to cope? But it's just like any of those other things you mentioned, eating disorders, addiction. Maybe it's like an obsession with shopping, you know, like whatever it is, it's like some sort of outlet to make you feel like you have some control again. And I remember, like, I love the way you said in the beginning, it's almost like a way to justify the pain. It's like, well, at least I have a reason now to feel this pain, because everything else feels so out of control. And like, I know for me, it was like, I shouldn't be struggling with this. It shouldn't be this hard. I just need to like choose joy and have faith and be a good Christian and be a good daughter and be a good student. And then at least if I was hurting myself, I had like a little bit of control over my level of pain, and I had some reason to like actually feel it, because then shame starts coming in and you start feeling the guilt, and it's this endless cycle of things that feel so overwhelming. And when you're in it, it's like, it's all you can see, you know, like whatever the struggle is, like when you're in it, our vision becomes very narrow on that thing. And it's so easy for the enemy to come in then and keep us trapped in that cycle of shame, hiding, and all of that. So what was that like for you? I mean, you outed yourself, which is wild and amazing. Like what a grace that God let that be your story. But what was that like? Because for me, just for those who don't know my story, I had been cutting for a year or several months at least. And a friend found out and told her mom, who told my mom. And so I was outed, and it felt like this act of betrayal. And I was angry, and I was like, this is the one thing that I had to myself, you know, and now it's out in the open. And it started this healing journey that I didn't necessarily want. Like I knew I needed it, but I wasn't really like, it just happened. So for you, what was it like going to someone? Was it scary, first of all?
It was terrifying. And I had a little bit of what you're experiencing too, because even though I did tell a couple of people, I didn't tell my parents. And so I had a similar situation where my parents sort of found out through this roundabout way, and there was this deep betrayal, and that's really, really painful. But I think that when I told somebody initially, I thought, thank God I had the wisdom to know in that moment that I was just in so far over my head. And I needed somebody to know. And it was terrifying. I thought, if I tell anybody, they are going to think I'm crazy. They are going to send me straight to a psychiatric unit. It's going to be straight jackets. It's going to be all of these things. And that was like my literal worst nightmare. I was terrified. Yeah. But equally, I was terrified not to say anything, because I knew how dark things were getting for me. And so when I went and told that, I told a friend initially, and she was like, I really think, in her wisdom at 15, she was like, I really think we need to tell an adult. Like, I don't know what to do with this. And we had, like I said, we had just moved to this place. I didn't have any adults in my life that I really trusted. And so I was like, I don't even know what that means. I don't know who to tell. I don't have
Yeah.
anybody to tell. And she was the one who suggested that we tell one of the volunteers at our youth group who she was really close to. And she's like, I think she's going to be great. I think this is going to be a good person to tell. And she was totally right. Like this woman, she was 23, which at the time I thought was like so grown up and like so adult, but she reacted so positively and so compassionately. And so in that initial moment when I told somebody, I had a lot of shame that I brought into that moment because I was just so embarrassed because it wasn't this image of this person who was cutting was not the image that I presented to the world. I wasn't dressing at all black. I wasn't acting like I was depressed. I wasn't doing any of those sort of stereotypical things that you expect from somebody who's self-injuring. And so I brought a lot of shame into that moment thinking I'm about to tell this woman the worst thing about me. And when she reacted the way that she did, I thought, okay, this is okay. Like, this isn't so bad. Like, it's okay to tell somebody that this is going on. And then later on, things unfolded in a really unfortunate way, and it ended up not being great for me. But initially, I was totally terrified, and then totally relieved that I had actually said something.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like, the pain is so shocking at first of like that vulnerability moment of letting someone into that pain. Like it is so like you feel all the things at once. You feel a little bit of shame and guilt and like, oh, how are they going to react? How are they going to respond? Will you still love me? What do you think about me? And then all of a sudden you're like, oh my goodness, I needed that out. Like the relief of that comes washing in, and there's nothing like that kind of freedom. And then you contrasted later on this other reaction that you got, which a lot of people unfortunately do, especially in a church setting, whether it's a mental health struggle in general or something that's maybe not as widely understood, but they told you don't come back.
It was probably the single most devastating moment for me in the whole story. Like if I look at this whole thing as a story, this was the rock bottom moment. It was this moment where this place that I had always felt like I belonged, regardless of which physical church we were at, just, in the church body in general, that was a place I felt like I belonged, a place where I was really plugged in. I was going on all of these mission trips and doing all of these, events outside of Sunday morning, Wednesday night kind of scenarios. I was volunteering. I was teaching Awana, which is like an elementary school Bible program for those who don't know, for these little first graders. I was volunteering with the fifth graders, leading like this fifth grade girls Bible study. And so it was devastating to have these people who I knew at that point pretty well and who really sort of respected my walk with God come back and be like, you're not welcome here. We don't think that your faith is right or real, and we think you're struggling in a way that excludes you from being here because you're a liability. And part of me understood that. Like part of me legitimately did even then understand they don't want me to hurt myself while I'm here. And I hadn't. Right. And I had never done that, but they didn't know that. But what it felt like was I had done the thing that we're always taught to do. Bring your sin, bring your worst moments, bring your vulnerability here, and you'll be met with grace. And I thought, I'm doing the thing I'm supposed to do. And instead of being met with grace, I was met with the opposite of that, whatever that is. I don't even know what to label that exactly. But I was met with the opposite of it, judgment and shame. And it felt like I was being punished for being honest, because I was standing there in that moment thinking, I'm the same person right now in this moment that I've been for the last 6 months or a year. You didn't know for the last 6 months or a year that this was going on, but it was. And now that now that I've been honest, now that I've asked for help, now that I've come to you in a moment of weakness and vulnerability, that's when it's too much. And so it was really, really hard.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, of course it would be. And that's something that breaks my heart about the church, like the facet of brokenness in the church, that I'm just like, oh man, no wonder people aren't willing to be honest.
Yeah.
No wonder we've gotten so good at hiding,
Mhm.
because we're scared that once we do the thing of bringing our sin and confessing our sin for the sake of healing and, wholeness in the body, it's like, okay, well, people are like, well, what do we do with this? This doesn't
Yeah.
fit. Th-
Right.
this doesn't fit the mold. And then, like, I'm sure you've experienced that feeling of like, well, does this disqualify me then? Like,
Yeah.
are my struggles, am I no longer allowed to be here? Am I not welcome? Am I not a good Christian? How do you make sense of all that? And there's so many people that's been their experience, whether it's been with self-injury or not, but it's
Right.
like, what do we do with that? Like,
Yeah.
where in the world do we go from there when we've done the thing where it's like, okay, Lord, I'm doing this thing that you've called me to do, but the body didn't respond like I hoped and like we were designed to. How in the world do you come back from that?
Yeah, it's really hard, and like, and having been in that place, I really feel for people when they tell me that that's part of their story, because it is so
Yeah.
difficult, and it's such a hard thing to reconcile, because at least for me, I knew what my faith was like. My faith
Mm.
was firm, and I had a real relationship with Jesus. Like, it was a living, breathing, actual relationship. And so to have these people who were pastors, who were spiritual authority figures, look at me and say, actually, maybe not, maybe you've gotten it wrong, maybe you're not doing it right, maybe you're not doing enough, was confusing, and as a
Yeah.
teenager, like, I didn't really know exactly what to do with that, because I knew how it felt to me, but I also trusted these other people to tell me what God wanted and what was right, and how to have a good faith. Like, I was still growing in my
Yeah.
faith. We all always are. And so that was difficult, and I think that I eventually came to a place where I realized, and I hope that this is a place a lot of people can come to if they've been hurt by the church or by people who represent the church, is that just because somebody is a pastor, just because somebody is, an elder, or a higher up in your church, whatever the hierarchy looks like, doesn't mean that they are God. Just because they represent God in some spaces maybe doesn't mean that they actually are, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they're representing God correctly even. They're
Right.
human, just
Yeah.
like you or I are. They're fallible, and they make mistakes, they make bad judgment calls, they react poorly. And so at the end of the day, I really had to separate this reaction by these pastors from how God was going to receive me in that moment, because I think it would have been really easy for me to take the reaction that they had, and then sort of place that on to God and say, well, this must be how God feels too. God must not want me.
Mm.
God must think I'm too much. God must this, that, the other thing. And so thankfully my relationship with God was real enough at that point, and strong enough at that point, that I was able to go, I know that they reacted in a way that was really hurtful. I also know that they react in a way that wasn't right. Even though they have told me these things, God, I know that you have told me these other things. I know that you call me beloved. I know that I'm your daughter. I know that I was made in your image. And so regardless of what they say about this situation, I know that this situation doesn't negate any of these things that I've known my whole life to be true.
Yeah, that's so good. I think that's the key, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
so many people who have experienced church hurt or rejection or judgment, they just take that and, it changes their
Mm-hmm.
dynamic with the Lord. And if their faith isn't like, if our faith isn't really rooted in a real active relationship with Jesus, it's so easy to let the responses of people, even with good intentions,
Yeah.
turn us away from that. And so for you, like,
Yeah.
where did you go from there? Because the story has a good ending. Like, you're
Yeah.
still a believer. You are experiencing healing in your life. You've come out on the other side of that with a strong faith. So what did the in-between space of that look like as you started wrestling through that shame, maybe feelings of rejection, judgment, and then eventually coming to this place of healing?
Yeah. So when we left San Diego, I was going into my junior year of high school at that point, and we moved here to Texas. My dad retired from the Army, and we again got plugged into a church right away. And like I said, I didn't quit self-injuring in that time. I just thought, I just need to hide this better. And so I sort of did the thing I always did. Like, I got really involved. I was one of the volunteers. I was in all these leadership positions. Like, all of that stuff just came very naturally to me. And so again, I sort of found myself back in that same position, but in a new church. And again, things got really overwhelming with the self-injury. And I just thought, I've created the exact same scenario I was already in here. Like, so much for a fresh start, right? Like, why have I done this again to myself? And so to this day, I don't know what possessed me to do this, but in that moment, I just thought, I need to tell my youth pastor again. Like, I think that it was just so ingrained in me to like confess and seek accountability that felt like the right thing. And so even though I'd had this horrific experience with my youth pastors in San Diego, I went to my youth pastor here in Texas. It was actually in the middle of a Wednesday night service. It was in the middle of the worship set. And I just felt very overcome with emotion and sort of the guilt and the shame that came along with self-injury and this whole scenario I'd created. And so I walked out of the building, and our youth building was a separate building from the main part of the church. And so my youth pastor saw me leave and he followed me out, and he was like, are you okay? And, I nodded or said yes, or, some version of that. And he was like, are you sure? And I said, yeah, I'm just thinking about some stuff. And he was like, okay, well, what are you thinking about? Like, come back inside. And I turned around and I pulled my sleeve up, and there were, all these scars and marks. And I was like, I'm thinking about this. And looking back now, that was maybe not the right way to share that information. It was a little shocking probably, but he reacted with such grace and such compassion and was so kind. And he said, okay, I'm just gonna leave you out here for, a few minutes, come back in when you're ready, and we'll talk about it later. And I thought, oh my gosh, here it comes. Like, I've created the same thing again. I'm going to get kicked out again. And instead, I got a letter in the mail later that week from him. And he, just said that he was praying for me and that he really was glad that I was there, and he hoped I would keep coming. And that if I wanted help finding resources or ever to talk about anything, to please let him know. And he would be more than happy to find those things for me. That was just such a relief to have that moment. And I thought, okay, this experience that I had in San Diego with my old church was not right, and it shouldn't have gone the way that it did. But now, a year later, I have this totally opposite experience to hold it up against and say, this is how this should have gone the first time. Like, this is how God calls us to react to people who are hurting. God calls us to come alongside them, to be community, to bear each other's burdens. And so in that moment, I think it sort of healed a lot of the hurt that I had brought from my old church. And like I said before, like, my faith was very strong, and it remained strong through the whole thing. And so as I, graduated high school and went to college, I went to a Christian college. My degree's in biblical languages. And so I was like very immersed in just the Bible and faith all of the time, even though I was still really struggling and wrestling with self-injury during that period. My faith was the stabilizing force in my life, the way that it had been my entire life, through all of the moves and through all of the instability. And so even though I really was also struggling, I really also was clinging to God. And I think people have a hard time seeing that both of those things can be true. Like, I think that they look at people who are struggling, whether it's with self-injury or something else, and they think, you're doing this to yourself. You're creating this problem. How are you also clinging to God in this moment if you are, quote unquote, living in sin? Like, that was how it was presented to me all of the time, was this was a sinful behavior I was engaging in. And if I was engaging in this sinful behavior, then I couldn't also be clinging to God. It was a one, pick one or the other scenario. And I think I came to a place personally where I was like, no, both can be true. Like, I can both be struggling. And by the way, I don't think that struggling in and of itself is a sin. I can both be struggling and also still cling to God. And so that whole time, I just thought, one day God's going to use this. I don't know what it looks like. In my head, it was like, I'm going to have a one-off conversation with somebody at some point and get to say, I lived this. I know where you are. I understand. I'm thinking, like, when I'm in my 40s and maybe I'm volunteering in a youth group, and I'm talking to some 15-year-old girl who tells me she's struggling. And that was what I thought it was going to look like. But in the darkest moments, I still held on to that shred of like, God's going to use this one day. And now he is in a very different way than I expected him to, in a very public way, a much more public way than I expected him to. But that faith that God was at work the whole time, through the entirety of it, through every horrific, painful, desperate moment, I think really allowed me to stay grounded in him, in faith, in my faith, and in the hope that we as Christians can have.
Yes. Oh, that's so good, Brittany. And I appreciate you talking about the tension between the two things that can be true at one time, because it's like, at any given point, most of us are going to be struggling with something. Like, I used to, and I've talked so much about this on the show lately, so I know this is probably repetitive for some of you, but I just been thinking so much about how I used to have this picture of what a perfect, good Christian looked like,
Hmm.
and struggles were not compatible with that.
Yes. Yeah.
And now, as I just keep maturing and growing with the Lord and having more of these conversations with real life people who are living in the both and of this
Hmm.
tension, it's like our struggles actually are something that keeps us tethered to the Lord, like it's
Absolutely.
part of our humanity that he knew, like it wasn't a surprise or something that's separate from our goodness, like
Yeah.
it's part of what shapes us. And I hate that the world is broken and that we have to go through pain and we have an experience with sin throughout our life. But it's true that we can struggle, and it doesn't mean that we are any less loved by God or that
Mm.
our faith is any less, like it doesn't disqualify our faith. Like it
Yeah.
doesn't cancel each other out at any point in the journey. And I'm so grateful that there are more people talking about that, because how many of us either grew up in church or have this false perception now that in order to be a good Christian, it means that I need to be overcoming all of my struggles and I need to get to this place of perfection or completion in my story and my testimony, whatever it looks like. I mean, those are the
Yeah.
things that I've wrestled through.
Yeah.
It's like, no, it's this ongoing journey with the Lord where he's continually refining us. He's continually growing us, healing us, and then using those things that we give back to him for his glory. And I love seeing that he's doing that in your life now. But yeah, I just am so grateful that you talk about how our struggles don't make us a bad influence,
Yeah.
because I think there's a lot of Christians who, or women who feel called to ministry, or maybe they want to share their story, or they have a friend who's struggling, but they feel like, oh, well, if they knew I was struggling with this, they probably wouldn't let me have a seat at the table. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? But that's so
Yes.
not true. So, what would you say to those kind of women who are like, I feel like I'm bad when I'm struggling, and that it like takes me out of the equation when I feel called to these things, or like how could God possibly use me, or how could I possibly do these things that I feel called to when I also have this over here, this pain and
Yeah.
mess and brokenness.
I think that's such a common thing. I hear that so much that, and I felt that if you're struggling with, and I think we sort of place, we create levels of struggle, and we say, well, if we're struggling with things,
Mm.
that are a 1 to a 5, we're still okay. We're in the clear. We can be at the table. We have a seat. But if we're in like the 5 to 10 struggle, then it's a no-go. And in
Mm.
reality, those levels are not real. They're just arbitrary things that we've made up based on our own personal experience and opinions and whatever else. But
Yeah.
also, God can use anybody who has struggled with anything at any point for his good. Like, it struggling does not disqualify us in any way. And in fact, I think that it actually enriches our testimony. And I think that we like the idea of a very clear before and after story. This
Yeah.
this is who I was before. I learned this testimony formula when I was like 5 years old, right? Like, it's,
Yep.
here's who I was before God, and then I met God, and here's who I am after. And it's supposed to be this very clean narrative arc and this really clear before and after, and it's supposed to be tied up with a neat, perfect bow. And there are just so few of us that have stories like that. It's just unrealistic. And so
Yeah.
I think that if we expect that of ourselves, and if we think that God expects that of us, then really we're doing everybody a disservice. It doesn't do anybody any good to hide our pain, to hide the things that we've gone through or are actively going through. Those are the places where God meets us. Those are the places where God uses us. And so if you're somebody who has struggled, whether it's with self-injury or anything else under the sun, know that it doesn't disqualify you. It's something that actually God can use, makes you usable in a more powerful way, even in some cases, because like you said, we all struggle with things. We all carry pain. And so my story might reach you in a way that somebody else's can't, because you don't relate to it, or, vice versa. And so I think that part of the beauty of everybody being at the table is we have all of these different stories and all of these different experiences and all of these different struggles, and we can come together and encourage each other and encourage those who are pulling up chairs, when we've maybe been there for a little while. It doesn't
Yeah.
disqualify us. It doesn't make anything ugly or wrong or need to be a source of shame. It's just because we're people. It's a sign of our humanity. And God became flesh. Like, Jesus was human, and so he gets it.
Yes. Absolutely. I agree with everything you said. And I think that's such a beautiful way to put it. Because I think we have this false narrative that being a good Christian means being perfect. But I think the more that I wrestle with this in my own life and kind of process on my own faith journey through my own mental health struggles and things, just, the daily struggles of humanity,
Yeah.
the more I realize it's not about getting to a place of perfection. It's just getting to a place of being healthy, of being
Hmm.
well again, of becoming whole again. And it's not something that we have to do on our own. It's through
Yeah.
daily partnership with the Holy Spirit and being an active part of the body of Christ through the church. And so I just love that there's not this pressure to figure it all out, get to the end of the testimony, wrap it up with a bow, and be good to go. Because
Hmm.
struggling, having a story, having a testimony, or having a season that's hard doesn't exempt us from future struggles either.
Right.
Like it's a cyclical thing where we're going through, ebbs and flows of life, and that's good and normal, and that's a healthy thing.
Hmm.
So for you today, what does healing look like? Because I'm sure you still have hard days. I
Yeah.
mean, maybe you don't, maybe you did reach your point of perfection, but I'm assuming
I, you
that
know,
there are
I,
still hard moments.
if I could sit here and be like, I've never had a hard day, I figured it out, I would be a millionaire. Like I would be selling that, on the street corners.
Yeah.
But I have not, unfortunately. I think that at one point I thought healing, like you said, meant that I had achieved some form of like perfection, or that I would never struggle again, or reached some pinnacle of, I don't know, enlightenment or something.
Right.
And I thought it was going to be this sort of like magical one-time thing, like I was going to cross some imaginary threshold and officially be healed. And that's just not what I've experienced. Maybe that's the reality for some people, and if it is, good for you. That's so great, and I'm so happy for you. But it is not how I have experienced things. And so for me, healing looks a lot more like day-to-day choices. It's choosing to be present in a life that I once wanted to numb out. It's setting things up for myself so that when I have hard days, I have support in place and people
Yeah.
know the things that I struggle with, so that I don't end up in this place of being alone and desperate like I was at one point. And for me, I think healing really is it's not necessarily a you have recovered, yes or no, check the box. It's a you have this ongoing thing, because it is for me ongoing. I still have urges. My brain chemistry hasn't changed. Like my brain still follows the same thought patterns that it did a long time ago. But now I know that those aren't things I need to be scared of necessarily. Those are things that I can just work through. And so healing for me looks like doing that the best that I can on any given day, and on the days when I mess up, because I still do mess up, not raking myself over the coals for it, going, okay, like I did something that I wish that I hadn't done. I made a choice that I shouldn't have made, or that now I have better skills to deal with. And like, why did I revert back to this old
Mm.
thing? And instead of getting stuck in that place the way that I used to, now I go, okay, we're going to pick ourselves up. We're going to keep moving forward. We're not starting back from square one, or, ground zero. Like we're starting from experience. And so that's what healing looks like. It's just this continual choice to keep moving forward and to keep living my life and keeping present in my life and allowing myself to experience life in its fullness, whatever that means, instead of trying to hide or numb it out completely.
Yeah, that's so good. I'd love to hear your thoughts if you have any encouragement or advice for a woman who's listening and maybe she's in that place of struggling with shame or feeling that she needs to hide. Like, oh,
Yeah.
I love the Lord. I trust that He can use my story, but maybe not this piece.
Yes.
Like I don't know how they would respond if they saw this part of
Mhm.
me. What
Yeah.
would you say to her?
I feel that so much. I think that shame thrives in secrecy. And
Mm,
the tighter we hold on to something, the more shameful it becomes, and the more shame we feel about it, because we get in that loop of, God can never use this. This piece is irredeemable. This piece is too much. And the more that we think that, the more sort of ingrained that becomes in us. And then it becomes harder and harder and harder to ever break out of that. And so I think that for the person who's in that spot right now, my advice would be, find somebody, as cliche as this is, find somebody that you trust and tell them. Like, it doesn't have to be a pastor. It doesn't have to be, some big authority figure or anything like that. But a friend or a loved one or a therapist or, whoever it is, because once you start speaking some of those things out loud, they really do lose a lot of power. And people
Yeah.
told me that, and I didn't necessarily believe them. I thought it was just a great party line, but it really is true. Like, the best choices that I have made for myself in my adult life are the times when I have taken those things that I've still held a lot of shame around or felt a lot of embarrassment about, or, even humiliation over, and shared them with someone. Because then in those moments, somebody else, who I trust to respond correctly and appropriately, is able to look at me and mirror God's love to me, here in the here and now, and say,
Yeah.
thank you for telling me I love you. Like, this has changed nothing. And, I wrote a story about that in the book, that where I experienced that, where a professor of mine in college, I told him, and I thought, he knows the very worst thing about me now. And he looked at me and he said, this doesn't change anything. And so I think that if we can find people, if we can be brave enough for, the 20 seconds it takes to just blurt the words out and find people who are going to respond like that, it really helps alleviate some of that shame. And once that shame starts to be chipped away at, it falls away pretty quickly. Shame has no hold on us. It doesn't linger if we don't give it the opportunity to linger. And I think the way to do that is by speaking our story, no matter how scary it is, no matter what we think the reaction might be, because we're often met with something we don't expect.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I agree. I would love to know, kind of along the same vein, before we go, what has your experience been? Because you mentioned before, like when you experienced that kind of feeling of rejection when the
Yeah.
church responded saying, "Oh, you're not welcome here anymore." That thing is too much, and it kind of translated onto your relationship with God. Like
Yeah.
if there's someone who maybe knowing, maybe without knowing, like has translated that kind of feeling of rejection onto their relationship with the Lord, what would you say to them? Like, how have you learned the truth about how God sees you even with your scars?
I would just say God loves you regardless. Like, it doesn't matter what you've done. It doesn't matter where you've been. It doesn't matter what you've struggled with. It doesn't matter where you are today in the midst of all of it. God is still there. God is not like, I'm just going to wait over here till you figure this out and then we can like come back and hang out again. God is right there in the midst of it with you, and God doesn't leave us or forsake us. And I know that in the depths of things, that can be a really hard truth to hold on to, because we sometimes feel very separate from God in those moments. And so,
Yeah.
for me, it was really important to still be surrounding myself with godly people, to still be in God's word. And it wasn't necessarily that it felt really good in those moments. I was sort of flipping through and reading things and being like, yeah, whatever. I've read this my entire life. But when we root ourselves in God's truth, like, those nuggets are hidden away in our hearts. And so on some level, we can still know them to be true, like in our soul, even if we don't feel them in our, or think them in our brain necessarily.
Yeah.
And so I would just say, like, even when it doesn't feel like it, just know that you're God's beloved child still, and he's not embarrassed of you or ashamed of you or ashamed to call you his own. None of that is erased. Your belovedness to God is not erased because of any circumstance that you have found yourself in, whether you've created it or not. God's love and his grace and his mercy and his compassion are bigger than and better than any of those things, and you are not excluded from them.
Yes, that is so good. Brittany, thank you so much for being willing to share your story, because I know there are so many women who are like, I didn't know we could talk about this. I didn't know we could talk about this and still be Christians, and still be a good Christian, still be someone who is pursuing the Lord and struggling, like both can live together. And I think the way that you have just built this history with the Lord through the entire process is so beautiful. And I'm so excited for your book to get into the world, because I know it's going to encourage so many people. So before we go, tell everybody, what can they expect to get from this book? Like, what's this main message you want to translate through the book, and where can we find it and stay connected with you from here?
Yeah, I'm so excited. The book is coming out. It's September 9th is its official release date, and it's called Stories Our Scars Tell. Wow, that was a mouthful in that moment. Stories our scars tell. I don't know that I've ever flubbed that before. But it's available for pre-order everywhere that books are sold. And really, the heart of the book is this message of hope. It's this idea that you're more than your worst moments, that to be healed doesn't mean that you're going to live this perfect life, but it's this idea of this life fully felt. And so the book doesn't have a whole lot of answers in it necessarily. My goal when I wrote it wasn't to say, I have figured all of this out and here are the answers. And if you just follow, steps 1 through 10, then you'll arrive and it'll all be great. It's part memoir, part spiritual reflection, part healing companion. And it's really meant to walk alongside anybody in a season of struggle, whether they've struggled with self-injury or not. That's the lens I wrote it through because that's my own personal experience. But I think it's really widely applicable for anybody who has struggled with most things or who have walked through a hard season and have come away wondering, like, now what? I'm holding all of these questions. I need to do some healing and I don't really know where to find truth. And so the heart of the book is inviting readers to find the truth that's baked into their own lives. It's like already there, that you've already lived, that maybe you just need a little bit of help recognizing. And so it's really just this message of hope for anybody who is struggling or has gone through a season of struggle.
I love it. Well, I'm so excited. You guys, I already have an art copy, so I am spoiled over here, but I cannot wait for you guys to get your hands on Brittany's book. Brittany, thank you so much for being here. I'm just so grateful for you and for your story.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to tune in to another episode of the Byword Show. I love having you here, and your support truly means the world to me. If you enjoyed this episode, would you leave a quick review? It really helps our community grow and reach more women. If you want more, you can shop my books, Waking Up, Living Open, and Love Is on Amazon, and be sure to sign up for my email list so you always get the latest news. I can't wait to chat again soon, but in the meantime, be sure to come hang out with me on social media, and remember, I'm cheering you on.